type of scheme we're going to be ultimately, if we went this way, doing sort of thing. But also it tries to capture the fundamental, there's going to be timing things here. So whatever scheme we do, there may be some initial costs that you would need to make, say, the scheme equitable that perhaps wouldn't be fully be able to be covered by the charging at that time. Over time, however, you'd hope that it would wash its face, sort of thing. So it's really a timing thing. The essence of where the TCQ work got to is that, you know, in time and as it had additional revenue, you could make a decision to offset other taxes, sort of thing.
So I guess, Mr. Chair, just, you know, without labouring the point, I'd make the observation that's obviously pretty fundamental, certainly from my view, that's the understanding this has been progressed. I support the notion of congestion charging, but I certainly don't support two charges being on the go at the one time.
Okay, can you, when the draft submission is circulated, if you could keep an eye on that, and we'll take note of that now. That's consistent, I think, with you know, our collective views. But if we can keep an eye on that as you see the draft come through your email inbox. Thank you. Good point. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of quick questions. Point 41 of your report, why wasn't the North West Rapid Transit identified as important?
So the origin of this list was the technical report from Phase 2 congestion question work, and that list is simply a list of projects that were in the 2018 RLTP.
Cool. Moving on to other matters. Or not cool, as the case may be. Looking at you know, carving out groups for equity reasons, I just think back to our port workers that generally come from South Auckland and West Auckland and travel all hours of the day and night. Have we reached a level of detail where we're looking at this kind of stuff? Are we looking at timing?
You want to talk about?
Yeah, just to thinking about the CBD, I mean, the charges that what we're proposing is only at peak periods. So a lot of workers won't be impacted, particularly hospo and a lot of retail workers, and certainly the port. I would expect that would be.
One last question, just in line with Councillor Newman's questioning. You know, we've got huge problems with public transport, both in terms of the current provision to existing routes not being enough, new routes that we desperately need in places all across the city, and we talked about Paremaremo the other day, that was a good example, and worker conditions, bus drivers' wages, all that kind of stuff, that all needs money. Was there a temptation to ring fence this for public transport improvements when we get revenue in?
David.
Would you mean in addition to what's needed for the scheme?
Yes.
In terms of where the work on the TCQ was always about, I suppose, looking after the scheme, and in terms of what the scheme needed, it wasn't seen as a revenue generating type of exercise that you would raise for, you know, additional things outside the scheme.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Now, Member Leanne Namani, please.
Kia ora. Just a quick question. So I had a look at the reports regarding potential equity impacts on Māori families, Māori mana whenua. I just want to know, are you confident that there's sufficient information at this point in time that have kind of delved into what the equity impacts are for Māori? Because I accept this as a truncated process.
Yeah. I think, look, I think it's a start towards answering these questions, and I think, you know, what came through in December from the committee is that we need to do further work. There has been some work, but I think there's more work to do before you'd make a final decision.
Is a supplementary? That will be after anything we might submit to the select committee.
In terms of this submission, as Robert mentioned, we would just highlight in the submission that issues for Māori are an important consideration for the work going forward. We wouldn't be able to resolve any more around those issues in the next 2 weeks. It would have to be based on what we know. So it would be a signal that more work is required in this mission. That's right, isn't it?
Brian, you've got something to add there?
Oh, thank you, Chair. Councillor, I can just inform you that myself.
Fortunately, I'm a IMSB member.
Oh, sorry, IMSB member. Myself and Shane Ellison, the CEO of Auckland Transport, are actually meeting the IMSB officers tomorrow morning to discuss this and any more work that we need to undertake.
Goodbye, thanks.
Kia ora. And Mayor Goff, please.
Yeah, I'm keen to get into debating it, but I'll resist that temptation and go straight to the questions. Can I just thank officers for what I think is a really good report, which I support. I have some quick questions. Equity considerations obviously critical. It won't work unless this can be deemed to be equitable. But what you haven't got there is the point that I've raised before, is you've got to go beyond the community services card to the workers that are earning a bit more than that, but they're the ones that traipse all the way from South Auckland into town. Will you put into the submission, please, an acknowledgement that it will build on the Community Connect, but will need to incorporate lower income wage earners who work in the city and travel at some distance from the west and the south?
That's noted, thank you.
Second question is, you talk in the submission about exemptions for low emission vehicles. I think by the time we actually get congestion charging, which probably wouldn't be till around 2025, you're going to have more and more electric cars on the road. And sadly, the people who will be buying the electric cars will be those that can afford to buy them. And that may be the opposite of being equitable. So I'm really challenging whether we want to exempt electric cars from the charge, which is partly about emissions, but it's also about congestion.
Noted. I suppose we just don't have a formal position on that, so that would be something that we would need to discuss, as we got to a more final decision sort of thing.
Thank you. Third question is, as I recall it, the congestion question reports were talking about relatively narrow hours of defined as peak hours. I'm finding at the moment, using the Southern Motorway, that peak hours run from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. and from 3:30 until 7. Now I'm just wondering how. I mean, you're not going to cross the T's and dot the I's on everything here, but you actually may, if it's about peak hours and you're trying to move people out of peak hours, that's what you're trying to move people out of. I don't think you can go with the narrower period of time if you're being realistic. That's kind of a question.
I suppose in terms of the work that was done, there was a number of factors, and the key one was trying to make adjustments to the overall network performance that were meaningful, but also keep the overall incidence of charging to drivers down, I suppose. So in effect, where it got to, that's where we landed, and there's a recommendation that for some corridors that peak is a lot longer. But I suppose in this illustrative example, anyways, because that's what the scheme is, you've got 8 to 12% improvements of network performance, and you had a more modest charge. So ultimately, that tariff structure and how long does it go is quite a key future discussion. So this is an option that was put forward, I suppose.
I mean, the obvious point is it's not much point in moving people to travelling after 8 to 9 at a lower charge if actually the congestion's the same as it was between 7 and 8. My last question, Mr. Chair, is can you just remind us, actually, if you actually ever did tell us, what the overheads are to run a congestion tax? I mean, both the infrastructure in terms of, I presume it's on cameras, and the operational costs. What sort of, I mean, the beauty of the regional fuel tax, of course, was that it had no overhead costs to administer. This will have, but what kind of proportion of the revenue will the infrastructure and the operational costs eat up?
Thank you. Look at the numbers that were done. The original estimates were done were pretty old now. They're based on probably 2015, even earlier data. We used some of the data from the the toll roads in Auckland, but as we know, those are very cost ineffective. And my feeling is that, you know, we would be looking at least trying to get the operational numbers well below 10% of revenue. If I was running the scheme, I'd be looking more like 5%. I mean, most of the infrastructure is already there in the city. It's just really just changing the cameras around and developing a back end which would interface either with the AT or the Waka Kotahi customer interface.
Okay, so 5 to 10% as against, say, Johnson's Hill, which would be about 40%, wouldn't it?
Sorry?
What would the overheads cost on the Johnson Hills tunnel?
Oh, yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know. It depends on what they include, whether or not they're including the amortizing capital costs, who knows, but allocation of overhead. But I think the existing toll roads are extremely inefficient, and they're probably ranging between 25 and 50%.
Okay, thank you. They're very helpful answers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And now Councillor Fletcher, please.
Why, thank you, and thank you for your presentation. My question relates to, should the Planning Committee today seek not to adopt these recommendations, what are the risks for Auckland?
Well, I suppose just thinking through that, one of the risks in terms of, I suppose, the signalling to the select committee of, you know, Auckland and the council would like to have, you know, or at least been a dialogue to get such a demand management tool, you know, that you would be weakened. So that's the biggest risk, really. You know, we've been in these discussions with government for some time. We haven't made a final decision. I suppose if we don't signal that we at least wish to have an option, it's not that is a risk that is not taken, that we're that interested, I suppose, to be honest. So that would be the key risk, I would see.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to, in the interest of time, not exercise my right to speak, but I do want to thank the officers, and I'm very pleasantly pleased to know that there is a woman working on their team, because I think more than probably any other policy we're looking at the moment, it has a huge impact on women, and just voice my support for it. And if it's required, I'm happy to second or move or whatever, because this work is long overdue. And from my perspective, we've been working around this issue for over 25 years. So I welcome the fact that we finally have an opportunity to put our support or otherwise on the floor today.
Thanks, Councillor Fletcher. Look, I'll take those succinct words of support. It is already moved and seconded, Councillor Fletcher, otherwise I would have taken yours as well. But thank you for those words. Now, Councillor Sayers, I hope you're feeling a lot better, Councillor Sayers. We're all going to hear you're cold now. So your question, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Look, I'll waive my right to speak to it as well, Chair. I just want to propose perhaps I think it's important that we have the options, so very happy to support it moving forward, so we've got some options on the table. My question's really picking up on a number of colleagues' comments around the equitability around a transport system, and I just wanted to get feedback from the officers. Are they aware that the way that the Rodney has funded its transport issues with bus funding is they actually put in a targeted rate. They haven't put any of that towards their kind of unsealed network. They put it all towards bus services and some footpaths, but even more going from footpaths into supporting those bus services. So is it possible to have it in any future report, some comment around the intention of possibly ensuring that those services that a area deems as important and important enough to put in a targeted rate to have them in place are actually, funded by Auckland Transport prior to, an additional or new congestion charge coming in. So, so it's really making you aware of that or reinforcing awareness of that, and secondly, asking if that can be mentioned in a future report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Did you get that?
Yeah, we've definitely noted it. So it hasn't been something that we've thought through at any level of detail, but we know what the council says.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sayers. And final question is from Councillor Philippina, please.
Thank you, Chair, and tēnā koutou, gentlemen. Firstly, 20th of May is when the submission is required, and is there an ability to ask for an extension?
We can always ask, and we have had some luck in the past when asking for a submission, an extension, but there's no guarantees, obviously.
If there is a request to ask and it is granted, would you therefore then seek that a workshop be put in place, so then all of us, after all the questions that have been raised, can then look and give direction, not from now, until the submission is required? Would that be an appropriate process and pathway forward?
I suppose, Council, one thing to be aware of is, in terms of submission, there's no further work that we've done since, on the TCQ work since December. So any workshop would be more to discuss what perhaps was in the submission, but we are using the baseline of the previous work. So it would be, I suppose, more of an opportunity to discuss it if we had an extension.
That's the reason why I asked, is to discuss the submission, not to end up going over work that we haven't done. So my question is still there. If the ability to have a workshop and an extension is granted around working, that Chair may be pointed at you in regards to this, because of the comments that I've heard and everybody's heard. This issue is a very big issue for us. So if there is a request and an extension is given, and this is around the draft submission for us to, again, have an input and direction, is that a process that you will entertain? If not, look, I'm fine. At least I get an answer to the question, Chair.
So one of my initial questions of the staff was, can we socialise this through a workshop? We've got so much pressure on our timetable and our calendars that there was actually very little opportunity. Our first priority is to respond to the Chair of Finance and the Mayor's deliberations on the budget, and as you well know, that is consuming a lot of our time. And so any requests of any other committee really have to line up behind those commitments. The balance of the calendar is pretty lean, and members have expressed an unavailability for some days, so that reduces it even more. So can I just come to the first question about can we request a delay? I would mind some further explanation there. I understand this is a select committee process. The select committee is not just calling upon Auckland Council to make a submission, it's calling upon any New Zealander to make a submission. And there is a time frame that has been established. Can you tell us, have there been instances of a select committee and what triggers a select committee to say we will actually extend the time frame for one contributor, mind you, a major contributor being Auckland Council? Because I think we need a bit of a reality check here.
I just recall from my own experience in the past writing submissions on various matters that on at least one or two occasions we have requested a extension, and there was no formal process as such to go through. I recall we just put forward the arguments around the complexity of our own processes and the time that it takes to get it through, and we were successful in getting the extension. I don't know what happened at the central government end. My discussions were with the senior officer in charge of the select committee. I don't know what they had to do to get approval for us, but as I say, we have had success in the past. That's really all I can say.
The other
Okay,
factor is whether or not, if we got an extension, how long that would be for. In my experience, those extensions aren't often for very long. It might be just for another week. And so in terms of what we would be able to do, if we say we've got a week, it would be very difficult to have a workshop, get everything ready and the time. So it would depends really on, A, do we get an extension, and whether or not the extension is of length, and then it's getting a workshop, which in my own experience is very difficult with this committee.
So look, and also from my experience, I just wanted to let you know that some extensions have also gone for about a month. So I mean, if you're going to use a week as your justification for not asking, I'm not prepared to accept that, because I know that there have been extensions that have gone on for another month. It's so important in regards to this. But Chair, I've asked my questions. I've got an answer which I'm not happy with, because it is so important for us around it. So I'm going to continue with the questions, Chair. Now, I think, Robert, is it in the middle? Yep. Robert, you mentioned around the equity issue that Councillor Henare ended up asking. Yeah, okay, yeah, I just thought I'll show you in as well with Leanne. So look, and you mentioned the 2013 census. Has any modelling been done with the 2018 census stats, which I think will have a very big impact on the equity issue that we're referring to? So has there been any modelling on the 2018, knowing the issues that we have faced? That's with the census, sorry, the results of the census, but they are still there.
Brian is best placed to answer that.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, as you know, the 2018 census was very problematic, and the data is still coming out of it, and there are questions around some of the validity of the data. What's happening right now is all the modelling is done by the AFC, which is the Auckland Forecasting Centre, which is a joint sort of entity put together by Waka Kotahi and Auckland Transport. They are rebasing the model for the 2018 census. That's happening right now. My understanding is that part of it's being done, but I think that, yeah, my feeling is that absolutely the social assessment needs to be, in the next phase of the work, needs to be redone with more input, but using all the new 2018 data, because the world has changed so much since 2013.
I totally agree. So my supplementary question, Chair, is has our unit, the DEMU, been contacted in regards to any projections based on the results of 2018? Just yes or no. If they haven't, so be it.
I think that's a no, I think.
Yeah, okay then. Chair, I just want to ask some questions around 30, 33 and 34, but also 38, and that's in regards to alternatives and suitable alternatives of public transport that are available, and it's been canvassed by some of the councillors and Independent Māori Statutory Board. So the timeline in regards to the areas of, around our submission, will that detail be to that extent in regards to the areas? Councillor Newman mentioned some of the areas in his particular ward where there is no public transport. So that's one of the key things that I think moving forward. So has there been any projections or, again, any modelling done on that?
David?
The TCQ work did look at staging its preferred scheme, and that was based really, I just can't remember the exact times top of my head, but the central city area was the first that they suggested would, and then it would sort of move out depending on the RLTP, I suppose, public transport availability. So in terms of where the project landed, that's what it suggested, sort of thing. So there are some indications from the project about how you could sequence it.
Thank you. And Chair, last questions, and that's in regards to 57, 58. Councillor Watson asked some questions around the regional fuel tax and the funding around there. Now in 58 there is mention of ATAP and RLTP, and also the possibility of losing some of the monies that's in the 21 to 31 documents in both of them. So has there been any discussions with government that if congestion charging is put in place, and I know we've still got a few more years for this to happen, that the regional fuel tax will be removed? And as a result, what happens then to the 21-31 plans around ATAP and RLTP, please?
In terms of the project, I suppose where the project landed in terms of, revenues from a scheme, it said that was an option to offset regional fuel tax. So there hasn't been any formal, resolution by either government or council on whether that would happen. So that is something that you would have to consider at a later date if the process continued.
So just to add to that, so the point we're trying to make in paragraph 58 is that if there is a net revenue loss for council as a result of transitioning from the RFT to TCQ, then under current funding rules, that will have implications for our ability to fund the program that we approved through ATAP. Yeah.
Chair, I reserve my right to speak, but that's my part. I thank you.
Good questions, and thank you, Councillor Filipaina. And I just remind members that the intention is to circulate the draft to all the members. Now, and I'll repeat, I did look at calendars and the ability to have a workshop to socialise this more deeply, but that's just been an impossibility. But of course, every report, we're often reminding you to furnish questions to our staff when you see the report, and that is always available to you. And if you require any further questions after today, please pose those through Kalinda Ishwar, and they will go through to David's team for a written reply. So there are lots of vehicles for you to engage on this topic, leading up to consideration of the draft submission. That feedback will come through to the Mayor, myself, Deputy Chair, and Independent Māori Statutory Board representation to finally sign off. I think that is a good process. Okay, now we are concluding questions now, and just before we go to debate, there's been a couple of points raised that I think are consistent around the table. One is about the equitable access to public transport in the future. So there's a reference to that. So there's a strengthening on the A Roman 2, if you can see that. And now I want to test, rather than go to a vote and amendments, can I just test? Personally, I think I would be supporting, but I'm hearing the meeting, and would there be a willingness to take out the word implementation and run with support and principle congestion pricing in Auckland? So take out the word implementation. Now, I hear Councillor Fletcher, and good on you, you made that very clear before. You've reminded us of how many years we've been on this. But I'm looking at the collective view as much as possible. I'm trying to embrace, without necessarily compromising, because that's never a good outcome, I'm trying to embrace the various points of view. Can I just take it on a show of hands?
Vote, Mr. Chairman, you can't do that. Point of order, you can't have a vote.
I'm just
You
asking.
can't have a straw poll, that's a vote.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to call a division on A when the vote is had. How's that?
Okay. Then as the mover and as the seconder, Mayor, would you, we need to lead on this. Can we delete the word implementation and just run with support?
Yeah, look, I hear what Kathy and others are saying. What we're doing is supporting in principle, because that's what we've done in the past. We're not supporting implementation because we don't know what the form of the implementation will be. So I think the word implementation should properly be removed, but I will be voting for support in principle, because if you don't support it in principle, you're wasting your time even making a submission.
So we're going to strike out the word implementation. Now, no, Councillor Fletcher, that's not in agreement with you. But we're going to put the motions as we have them before us now to the debate. Thank you. We'll take the of out as well. Thank you, Councillor Cooper. And the speaking, councillors, the speaking order starts with the Mayor, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Look, I notice this is actually the fourth time we've discussed this. It's not the first time. And at each point when we've discussed it, we have supported effectively in principle moving to the next stage. And this is the next stage. If you kill the concept of congestion pricing by not supporting it at this point, then you never have the option. But is the option that we've got in front of us what the final option will be? No, there's going to be quite a lot of change in how this is worked through between now and when a legislative proposal would be put up. By supporting in principle, we do not take away our right to oppose the final version of it if it doesn't take on into account the conditions and the qualifications we want to add to it. And to me, those conditions are essential for congestion pricing winning public support and being effective and being fair. But I just need to make this point. It's hard to imagine that we will actually ever deal with congestion unless we look at the demand management side as well as the other side. And look, maybe you don't need a congestion tax, because if we go on the way that we are at the moment, the roads will be so gridlocked that people will be doing mode change anyway. But that seems like a bit of a lack of courage in saying, actually, we've got to bring it forward so that we can have a system that will actually reduce congestion. In our ATAP, at the end of 10 years, congestion will be greater than it is now, not less. And if we don't use other instruments, then we are all guilty of saying we lack the courage to do anything, therefore we'll just let congestion take its course and everything will be gridlocked, and that will have massively damaging impacts. The other thing I've got to say is that we've all sat around this table saying ATAP, we're a bit worried about ATAP because it doesn't reduce emissions in absolute terms. This is not the answer, but it's part of the answer to reducing emissions. And for both of those reasons, dealing with congestion and reducing emissions, we've got to find a new way of tackling this. If we abandon this, then we're absolutely saying we're not showing any leadership about how we can deal with either of those problems. I want to also make some point about the conditions. To me, equity is the key, because if we don't deal with equity, we are going to have grossly unfair impacts on people that are low income, whether they're from the south, the west or the east. And the way that I think we can do that is build on what we've done already in ATAP by saying that the Community Connect scheme goes beyond simply those that are on the community services card to low income workers. And I'm not thinking of the waterside workers. Actually, I think they're probably among the better paid workers in the city. I'm thinking about the people that come into town to work in the shops, to work in the offices, clean the offices and so on. So equity to me is a precondition. The second thing is the whole point of a congestion charge is to achieve mode change. And if you don't have anything for people to move to, then it's just a tax. And the purpose of the congestion tax is to achieve a mode change. Therefore, you need to have the alternative mode in place. And hopefully we will have it in terms of the City Rail Link, the Eastern Busway, the Northern Busway extensions and the work to the northwest. And there's no reason, Councillor Henderson, why we couldn't put that in the document as well, and I'd be supportive of that. The third thing is, I've mentioned emissions. We need mode change to get emissions down, and this is a way of really bringing forward mode change rather than waiting for it to happen organically because we're gridlocked. But there is also a need to carry people with us, and when we look at where congestion taxes have worked around the world, and I think of Stockholm as the model place, actually more people ended up supporting the congestion tax after they introduced it than before, because they saw that it worked. And if we can get even the modest ambition set out in this paper that we reduce congestion by about 8 to 10%, so that it would be like driving on those arterials during the school holidays, that would be something that is really worthwhile. So just to end on the point that I started with, if we were to say these are the pros and these are the cons, we're adding nothing to the select committee process. We might as well not waste our time. They want to know that, subject to conditions, are we prepared to support this? The National Party supported it when they were in government, and I'm presuming they still support it. Labor is supporting it in government, the Greens support it, and the ACT Party supports it. This will impact more on Auckland than anywhere else, but that's because the problem is predominantly in Auckland. And I think this is a chance for us to be part of shaping the solution to the problem, not standing to one side and saying it's all too hard, this might not be popular, we shouldn't touch it. I think we should support it, but we should support it subject to the conditions that we're setting out in these recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Briefly, members, look, this is not coming to us fresh. We've been on this for 5 years this September. Councillor Fletcher says that we've actually been talking about it a lot longer, and we have been. I'm aware that there is multi-party support for this in the Parliament, so it'll be an interesting debate at the Select Committee between the parties. But we're the principal player, and we need to go there well informed. We need to highlight our absolute bottom line prerequisites. But you know, I think we have to really face up in Auckland that we cannot just build our way out of congestion, as we've been trying to do for probably 2 or 3 decades now. It is an impossibility, and we do need some inducements to shift mode. We definitely do, and we need innovative new tools, and this is not a brand new tool. It has been trialled and proved successful in international cities, as the Mayor has just outlined, particularly Stockholm and London, and again in Singapore. It is a combination of investment and offering carrots and sticks, incentives and disincentives to shift mode and decongest our network. It is dire at the moment. We need to pull something else out of the bag, and we need to be genuine in our engagement, and I don't have any doubt that we are. But 4.5 years, coming up 5, of concentrated, exhaustive work by our staff, and I do acknowledge David and your whole team, together with Auckland Transport, collaborating on this body of work to take to government. The direction of this submission is not one, it's deliberately not one of outright support. It is very cautious, because we know that we've still got some hurdles to climb over, and they are clearly outlined. But we have been on this for a long time, members, and I think if we go to the government through the Select Committee process with a bit of a meek lack of commitment to this, I think that sends quite a poor signal to a government that we are hoping will partner with us to provide us with the capital and the operational expenditure to make sure that public transport network is even further enriched, well beyond what the RLTP draft provides for now. So those bottom lines, those prerequisites, those must-haves are going to be clearly outlined in our submission. And the points that are in B through to Roman 6 clearly identify what they are. We do need to have this genuine ongoing dialogue. Those caveats are clearly outlined there. So I'm hoping that you can lend support to this important next stage and send a signal to the Select Committee that we are in support, in principle, of congestion charging for Auckland, subject to. So I will now take Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'll say I do support the submission. There's been a huge amount of work put into it, and I acknowledge our staff for doing that. And that's the reason why I will support it, because the work has been done. And for me, it's really highlighted the fact that you've got to support the submission, because otherwise there's no way to communicate. And I mean, I've been consistent on that. Even some things I haven't supported, like, you know, the whole seabed mining, I supported the submission. Doesn't mean you have to support the pricing or whatever it is, but you've got to be able to communicate with government our views. I mean, my knee-jerk and kind of immediate reaction just go, no, I don't want to be charging my people any more than they currently have to pay on the fuel tax. They already don't have a lot of opportunity. They don't have an option to do anything else for a lot of them, anything north of about Ranui. You've got a train there, but there's nothing in the northwest. And that's the same for the people in Kumeu, in Whenuapai, and Hobsonville, Massey, all of those people, even Te Atatu. And so for me, we've got to tell them the things that we think are really important to take care of before they start charging people. Because you can't change someone's behaviour if they've got no option. And the question that Councillor Henderson asked about, where's the northwest? Well, because it isn't in there, because there's no timeline. There's just no timeline. And these bus improvements don't offer anything. I mean, I've got, on the motorway, we've got a bus lane at Royal Road on-ramp, but all the motorists are using it because there's no bus. So even without an RTN, even the current network doesn't give anybody options, and they are on the bus for hours. So for me, we've got to tell them that, but also the government, you know, I was going to say, this has been, since Helen Clark's government, we've been talking about a northwestern busway. How long is that? It's 20 years since that started, more. Nothing's happening, and I've felt completely let down for my community for decades now. And so we've got to get that happening before we ever allow this to happen, because you can't change people's behaviour if you don't give them an alternative. So look, I support us putting a submission, and I support highlighting the equity issues, but I do think there's a real issue around if you exempt people because they can't afford it, then the whole purpose of this is to change behaviour. So there's a real fine line between exempting a whole lot of people if we're not changing behaviour. The other thing that I think is really important, I'm on that motorway every morning, out my way, and all the tradespeople, the delivery people, you know, they don't have an option. They've got to get around to make a living and to service our region. Do we then, you know, they can't get on a bus. So we've got to really look at the balance there. And if you make it harder for people to do business, then it's then more expensive for the people that need the services and goods and services. So for me, I support the submission when it comes to us. I want some of those things put in there, but I wouldn't vote against it because it's just then no ability to communicate our messages. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Member Tauhenere, please.
Kia ora, Chair. First of all, I would have liked the governing body to have said yes or no in a resolution. Yes, we agree, or no, we don't agree with the congestion charge. And maybe that'll come. Secondly, it's a bit about the chicken and egg situation. Do you have congestion charges so that you actually change behaviour, or do you change behaviour and then introduce it? You know, all of those things. It's also about choice. Public transport is about choice. Well, actually, at the moment, I live in Te Atatu Peninsula. I only have two choices: my car, or my truck, and the bus. And I just don't go on the bus for a whole lot of reasons. And then we come to the issue of mitigation. With all the workers out west, out south, getting into the city. And like the Mayor says, it's not about the ones that are on a good wicket, it's actually about the ones that can't afford So there has to be some sort of work done on how do you give a discount to those that actually can't afford it. The rich and famous will be okay at the end of the day because they can afford whatever, and that's the beauty of where they are. I'm really behind the thought that if you have a congestion charge, and even with regards to a fuel tax, that the money should go into public transport. It shouldn't go anywhere else. And as a member of the IMSB, I'm happy to support the motion because we get an opportunity to work with everybody else in coming up with a final or the final plan. But I also would like to say on record that IMSB reserves its right to give its own submission as well as working with our colleagues on the council to come up with a plan. So I'm happy to support this, even though I have some issues about what comes first, the chicken or the egg. I think it just gives us an important opportunity to design something that is one, it's going to work, two, it's going to work for everybody, and three, that might in fact get more people to maybe change their behaviour, or maybe the system can change its behaviour for the benefit of our city. So yeah, that's me.
Kia ora, Member Henare, and Councillor Coombe, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to be speaking in support for the resolutions. I was really impressed with the understanding of members around the table when we had the presentation on taking the lane on the Harbour Bridge, because it is a counterintuitive concept that you can take away a lane and actually improve congestion. And this is a very similar concept as well, that on face value it might seem counterintuitive that you charge more but you can actually create more equality. So it is unfortunate that we haven't had a workshop to be able to really thrash out these concepts, because none of us around this table are transport experts. We're not, I don't think we have an economist either. So we are trying to grapple with this, and I guess some of the things that have framed my thinking on this is going back as far as an Auckland conversation in 2013, and I've always been a massive fan of Auckland conversations and the ability to learn about city building. And Edward Glaser, who wrote The Triumph of Cities, and he's an urban economist who talks about how cities are our greatest creation because they're the place where people can be the healthiest, the greenest and the richest. And he talks as well about you can't engineer our way out of congestion. You have to charge for a valuable asset such as roads. And the approach we take at the moment is very Soviet, it's very communist, to give away a valuable asset for free. And road charging is actually a progressive approach, but only if the proceeds are invested in public transport. And he talks about Singapore, where they have had road charging for decades, and it really works. And, there is this massive concern about equity. And our Minister of Transport, he was a real doubter about road charging. He really did not support it. He came from a position that it would have an impact on the most vulnerable. But he's had his own road to Damascus experience on this subject. I think he shared that with us, and I think he's been public about it, and he won't mind me saying this, because if you look at the status quo is hugely inequitable. We have transport poverty. We have communities without public transport. We have our most vulnerable communities suffering from the worst impacts of pollution and the health outputs of communities that don't have alternatives. So we really have to be leading the thinking around this debate, and that's why I want us to be putting in a submission. I want us to be supporting this in principle, because we really have to be shaping this debate and shaping how congestion charges are implemented to create a more equitable transport system. So I'm really going to be looking for that draft submission and wanting to be seeing that we do that, because I don't think that's really being picked up. This isn't just about mitigating inequalities. This is about creating equality and having a transport system that's fair for all Aucklanders. So in terms of us leading on that, and also it will destroy our credibility when you look at our resolutions on ATAP and the RLTP if we do not support this in principle and actively engage with this policy development. Because if you recall, members, on the 1st of April, we said that we approved in principle ATAP with the expectation that one of the following actions would be investigate complementary levers to reduce transport-related emissions, such as land transport pricing reform. So we have to be at the forefront of this debate if we're going to be credible on leading on emissions reduction, on our transport planning and our urban planning. So this is why I think this is such an important concept to be part of that. And in terms of the need for dialogue with the community, I absolutely agree with that, because this is going to get framed as another tax. This is just council trying to do a tax and put more charges on people, where actually, you know, introducing this is an opportunity for, I've talked about just the equity in terms of the investment that we can put into public transport and far fairer transportation system. But also we're already hearing from our communities, and I just wanted to end with what the City Centre Residents Group, who are always watching our committee online. Always surprises me to know there are people out there watching you online, but they've already sent me their submission, and they've asked that we introduce congestion charging as soon as possible across Auckland, starting around the city centre. And they're saying, because this is an area, their perspective, it's an area susceptible to congestion and very poor air quality. It's the worst black carbon in New Zealand. So this is another benefit of road pricing. And so they see this as really central to our achieving our city centre master plan, access for everyone, and low emissions area as well. And it will help reduce traffic and encourage more walking, cycling, and free up space for public buses, and free up space for people who need to be on the road. And they're often our low-paid workers who are stuck in traffic, and it's costing them. When people can't get to their jobs because they're stuck in traffic, they're the ones who suffer. So this is about freeing up work for our most vulnerable freeing up roads for our vulnerable low-income workers as well. So, and the city centre residents have also raised, you know, they want to see how this is going to be implemented in terms of a cordon around the city centre and how that will have an impact on their financial situation, because, you know, there's a lot of low-income residents as well living in the city centre. So thank you for that opportunity to speak in support, and I appreciate the work that's going to go into this and those that are delegated to do it. So kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora. Next call from member Leanne Namani, please.
Kia ora. Like my colleague, I'm happy to support with a number of, I guess, conditions or reservations, and they're pretty significant. I think if we look generally at the notion of congestion tools with equity mitigation measures aligned to it, I think as a concept is something that is going to be useful for us to explore. There's a precondition there, and that is I guess, what we see as the interim fuel tax going if other tools come in. We've got real concerns with, I guess, the information that we've got at the moment about what the impacts are going to be on Mātā Waka and Mana Whenua. And I think that officers accept that. It's because of the truncated process. But we think that that work needs to be undertaken alongside our Secretariat, because some of the reports upon which I guess all this is based aren't rigorous enough in terms of understanding what those impacts are. And a couple of examples, and Alf referenced it, what data are we looking at? Not only the 2018 census, but what does the post-COVID travel demand look like? And what other more specific drop-down data do you need, particularly within Māori, that perhaps you haven't looked at in the generic social evaluation reports, to kind of just dig a bit deeper, because we are querying the fact that you can't, I guess, see the impacts of Māori over and above just generally low-income households. That's not the kind of, and I think that's because that next drop-down hasn't been looked at. And I think, I mean, it's a complex issue, and it's all connected to the modelling and the implementation timelines and the availability of public transport, particularly in the south and west, if something was to be implemented. So I think in amongst all those concerns, we'll move to support it, but we really do need to step the game up in terms of those equity impacts and being really clear about those. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Nguyen, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. Councillor Coombe, I quite like you. I think that, yes, I think that I'm listening to the communist transfer. I actually think that the transfer this morning that I was listening to was the proposition that we give one lane of the Harbour Bridge to a group of people, and I'm not sure how they're going to pay for it. That actually there are many issues that need to be addressed in Auckland with respect to choice and opportunity. And what we have always done, and I've said this before, is we always give choice to those who have the most choice first before we address everything else. Chair, I have a real problem with supporting the implementation of a congestion price in Auckland. I note that A2 refers to having public transport services and projects in place. I think if those public transport services and projects were in place, you might see people making the switch without having to be priced to incentivise that behaviour. But in reality, the opportunities are not equal. They're not equal. They're not equal, Councillor Coombe. I respect your advocacy, but they are simply not equal opportunities. And I think that we have to address the issue of services and projects first. And people say, well, you've got to pay for it somehow. I accept that. Well, we do have to pay for it somehow. And my constituents have been paying for it, disproportionately paying for it through the fuel tax. They really have. It's not something that has an equal impact. It has a disproportionate impact actually on some of the most vulnerable people. And I have to say that in the Museum of the Ill-Informed, the prize exhibit would be those people who oppose Mill Road, because the Mill Road corridor is not just about cars and trucks.
it is also about providing new infrastructure to incentivise different modes of transport, walking and cycling, and buses. When I look at my ward, I have real challenges, Mr. Chair, when it comes to getting agreement from Auckland Transport for contracting new bus services. I have had some success. but it has been bloody hard over these 4.5 years. We've got a little green minivan that drives around Manirewa, funded by the local board and underwritten if need be from gaming money. Now, it's not funded by, it's not a contracted service by AT. So when it comes to the issue, Chair, the reason why I can't support A in its current form is I don't trust this process. I don't trust that we will actually address the equity issues first before we give people the opportunity to make the transition in response to a price. And this isn't about politics for me. I get that there's a lot of political support for this, but the issue for me is that it's a lonely old argument out there. And look, the people that are going to make these decisions are not the people who are low-income people. The people that are going to make these decisions are the people who can afford the consequences in their own personal lives. But the people that will pay the greatest cost are those people who are the least able to afford the consequences in their lives. And I suspect will also be some of the people who will be last in line for the alternate services to give them a real choice about leaving the car at home. I respect people's views. I particularly respect Councillor Coombs' views because she is genuine in her desire to improve the lot of people in Auckland, including my constituents, in terms of the delivery of public transport services. I really do. But I have a genuine concern about the sequencing of this. So to ask me to support in principle the congestion pricing, no, because I believe that there is an equity issue that needs to be addressed first before we can go down the path of pricing it. And in any event, some of my constituents already pay some of the highest prices for living in Auckland. So I would like my vote recorded against A when it comes to, I think a division's been called anyway.
Thank you. Just for members' benefit, the A doesn't stand alone. It stands with conditions that are Roman 1, 2 and 3. But I appreciate your contribution there, Councillor Newman. Councillor Watson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try and make mine a short and typically telling contribution here. But I just wanted to put on record a couple of things that'll no doubt go to my fellow councillor too here. The first one is just to note the rather restricted version of the council compass that seems to be in operation generally and is becoming increasingly evident during the long-term plan when it comes to inequity or the poor of Auckland. There is a north of Auckland. It doesn't just stop at east, west and south. We do have poor people over the north too who are also paying a disproportionate share of the fuel tax, along with the wealthy people like myself and Councillor Walker. So I just would like that just put on the record for a start, because the whole north seems to get missed out when we start talking about equity. Have a drive around parts of Birkdale and Glenfield and Whangaparara, and they're the equivalent of any deprived area of Auckland. Secondly, in terms of the proposal here, I get the pragmatic notion that that we want this to progress. I personally support the notion of congestion charging more than I do than the way the regional fuel tax is operating. But I would put a couple of provisos on the line. I think it's important to make it publicly, and that's firstly the understanding that it's either or, it's not both, and that's from the word go. So we're not going to get into this situation, as often occurs, where something is just ongoing and we actually have a degree of double dipping that a lot of people just can't afford. Secondly, and this might be more peculiar to the north, the notion that existing charges or tolls that apply, for instance, on the northern extension, that it's it's not fair to retain those under the charging regime that's being advocated or at least signalled here. So, on a pragmatic level, Mr. Chair, I recognise the necessity to support this, but I do want to make those provisos very clear, because that will certainly is the understanding of me as a councillor in the first place, but certainly anything less than that would be very inequitable, and more so than the inequity that's been covered in this report. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And Councillor Bartley, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. I note that that we've been supporting since 2016 a strategic approach to undertake progressive movement to road pricing. So my concern is around what has been done during that time, because obviously it was raised back then, the issues regarding equity, the issues regarding our vulnerable communities. What has been put in place since then to address those issues? And I don't see that. I do not want to support and I don't like being put in the position where I've had to make this decision here in a public forum and not in a workshop where we could have really gotten into the issues about congestion pricing. I don't support because I don't feel like I have enough information or that the work has been done. I want to see the work done first around how our vulnerable communities are going to be looked after and, have the effects mitigated of a congestion charge. I'd rather see that first before I give my support in principle for congestion pricing. I, supported the regional fuel tax naively, assuming that we would keep public transport fares affordable. And then I note, after we did it in July 1, 2018, whenever we put it in place, February 2019, we put up the fares 3.2%. February 2020, we put up the fares 3.4%. February 2021, we put up the fares 4%. So that to me shows how vitally important it is that we make sure there are options, there is the work put in place of how we are going to address the issues that our vulnerable communities will go through. And it's not, like I noticed in the report, there's talk of a community services card. It isn't just about a community services card, as the Mayor mentioned as well. It is the ones that are working in the low paid work jobs that are not in the position to renegotiate their flexible working hours, so that they can avoid driving at peak hours. They're not in those positions. It's not a situation where you can rock the boat and do that. They're not like us where we can just Skype into a meeting and work from home. So it's not realistic that, people in our most vulnerable jobs or whatever are going to be able to handle this. So yeah, I definitely want to see that work before I give my support for this. Also note, in this report, it talks about the inquiry will have a dialogue with Aucklanders through the submissions process. But we all know those ones that are going to be affected the worst are not going to engage in a submissions process. So it's even more important that that work happens about how the effects are going to be mitigated for those communities. So that is where I'm coming from in not supporting A. I think I can still support the work of officers and the submission by supporting B, but definitely I do not want to give any support in principle for congestion pricing at this stage. And that doesn't mean that I'm not on a road to Damascus to look at anything or have a turning point, because I've got my eyes wide open. And yeah, the turning point I think happened a long time ago. But yeah, that's where I'm coming from. And in terms of equity, please let's not get confused about equitable access to public transport and then also the equity in terms of the effect on vulnerable communities, because I'm seeing it start to get a bit blurred there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you're not allowed to go to Damascus because it's not in the travel bubble. Now, we've got a few more to speak here. I've got Councillor Casey, Councillor Cashmore, Councillor Henderson. Are there others? I'm just mindful of the time. Councillor Filipino, did you want to speak? Councillor Filipino put there. Okay, Councillor Casey, please.
I'll be really quick. I'm on the road to Damascus, but I'm at the very start of it, and it's a long road. Joe's on the road too, but you know, we need to be taken down the road, and that's where I'm at right now. To say that we support in principle congestion pricing isn't something we should be doing today. The report actually says it, and if you turn to paragraphs 7 and 8. It is proposed the submission highlights issues of key concern. The case for congestion pricing in Auckland. Next paragraph, further work will be required on each of these issues. So that says you haven't made the case for our in-principle support of congestion charging. That may well happen at some later date when we do go through this debate, but I'm not supporting A, and I kind of feel a wee bit hijacked that this debate's taken place, because it could have been, I think, a unanimous decision for us to go ahead to investigate congestion charging. I think most people would have supported that. But now we're going to have a divided vote on the question that we're not actually really up to debate properly, because we haven't had the answers to all those questions. So just a couple of points I want to make, and one is on consultation. I don't know what the people of Auckland think on this. I can guess, though. And I can guess if you asked 100 people in the various wards that we live in, what they would say back to us. And that's always been the case. That's why we're not polling. We're great at consultation. We've just done the emergency budget. We've done the 10-year recovery budget. And we could easily have had a question in there about congestion charging. No, we didn't do it. No, I know. But what I'm saying is we're good at consulting when we want to. The reason we don't want to consult on this is because people have an aversion to paying twice for roads. And all due respect to Pippa, it's an environmental concern. Mine is absolutely a social concern, and it is the people who already can't afford to get in their cars and drive to Auckland for their low-paid jobs. And this will just make it harder. So when you have investigated the mitigation questions, the equity issues, and to my satisfaction, then I'll support congestion charging. The work hasn't yet been done. So I think it's way too early for A, and so I will be voting against A and supporting the rest. But not happy with the process, Mr. Chairman.
Good, thank you. And Councillor Cashmore, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not on the road to Damascus. I have to travel during peak, so I can't afford the time. All the tolls, all the charges. You know, this is cart and horse, and this is security and lack of it. So the successful places that these charges have been introduced around the world is when there has been a political buy-in. That's the first point. The second point has been when it's been a zero-sum game. So in our instance, we bring in congestion charging, and the fuel tax has to go up exponentially. So it's a zero-sum game for cost. No one should pay twice, and other tolls, John, should definitely come off, quite rightly so, once there is a cordon that goes into that area. We are rolling out a rapid transport network. It's quite some speed. The past 2 mornings have had some explanations around the Panmure to Botany, and this morning around Mangere Airport to Botany. Now, both of these business cases are progressing at speed. That's going to change how the south operates. My question to both of them was, where's the one to the west? And that's exactly what we need to be doing. No one should pay if they don't have a quality and quantum of service that sets a standard. That's my first point. And I don't care if the PT's by bus, by train, by ferry, by ATM or whatever, but it's got to have quality and it's got to have quantity. The second and third point is there has to be fairness and equity, and I think we all agree with that. And that was a key component in Stockholm. It was a key component in Oslo. It was a key component in London, and it's also a key component in New York. So that fairness and equity point, I think, is an absolute given. It's how it's done is the challenge. It's got to be done by some exemption, or it's done by a payment by another means. The other point is electric EVs on the road get an exemption. Don't listen. No, definitely not. Simply because this is about removing traffic to increase productivity. Removing traffic to increase productivity. We are losing between $2 and $3 billion a year from the lack of productivity on our networks, okay? And that is a critical, that affects everybody. It affects the lowest paid, probably some of the most. So for every car that gets off the road where they have a bus or a train, there's room for someone else there to travel with their commercial van or their truck. So you know that I'm involved in the trucking game a little bit, slightly less what I was. We didn't bring trucks through Auckland up until 3 years ago. We stopped doing it then because it was just too damn hard. We were losing trips a day. And that's simply because of the congestion. Talk to Don Braid, he used to do 6 trips a day, then it went to 5, then it went to 3. Okay, people talk about tradies. You stop in where all the building sites are and there'll be 5 Toyota 4x4 pickups there. I think, and I've said it to guys who work for me, find a smarter way to get to your work, guys. You don't all have to come in your own pickup. And they've actually embraced some of that. Not always possible, but they've thought about swinging by Johnny's place and Charlie's place and picking up Sally as well. And it works. It can be done. It's just about, okay, how do you incentivise it? And we've incentivised it with free lunches. So, folks, we need to be politically brave around this. We've led this charge at the government successively for quite some time, and we need to continue with that. It might not end up exactly how we want it, but what we do learn from Oslo is there was a lot of public opposition, but the politicians had the intestinal fortitude to push it through. Within 3 months, the public loved it, and they expanded it rapidly over the following years. And that, to me, is an example of how we should aim to do it. We need to fund PT in the most excessive and successful ways possible. We've come a long way from where we were 10 years ago, a hell of a long way. But there's more work to be done. And one of these levers about changing behaviour is critical for congestion, but equally critical for climate change. If you want to mitigate carbon, then transport in Auckland is the #1 item to do that. The #1 item. Lockdown showed us that to get down to our 50% level, that's what we had to do. That's a huge challenge. But this is a key lever. Probably the second most important lever in the carbon mitigation strategy is exactly this point. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. It all comes as a collective recipe for a better Auckland. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Filipina, please.
Thank you, Chair. Process has always been one of the key drivers for me. And with those that are around this table who were elected in 2010, process was a key driver. I haven't liked the process in regards to getting it to the committee meeting. I would have loved to have had a workshop with the submission and discussed the submission moving forward. That opportunity hasn't happened. I'm now left with a decision as to whether I support A or not. So in regards to congestion charging, I, like Councillor Bartley and the others around this particular table, ended up supporting regional fuel tax. Why? Because I ended up talking with Auckland Transport around some of the projects that we would end up benefiting from regional fuel tax, and we have. And interesting enough, the community that I represent in the Manukau ward, along with Councillor Collins, ended up saying, look, thank you, because we've now got that Manukau bus interchange. We've got something to be proud of in Otahuhu. So the regional fuel tax was one of those that I had the information to base my vote on whether to support or not. I then also got information from the Independent Māori Statutory Board around the effects to Māori around the regional fuel tax. That is one of the caveats that for me, in regards to any support for this congestion charging, is the equity for Māori. That is a big issue, and that needs to be addressed. The reason I mentioned 2018 census, and I've mentioned it before in another forum, even though the information and how they did it has been flawed, it's still information that at least we can look at instead of going back to 2013. So to our staff, 2018, we still need to have a look at that. We have Remu for us to have a look at it as well. With any decision that I end up making, it has to be based on evidence. I haven't seen the evidence, but A gives us the ability to get that. through the submission process with the conditions that are mentioned in Roman numeral 1, 2 and 3. I want to get that information back. I, along with everybody else around here, will be reading the submission, and I will be having an input if I think that there are some issues that need to be addressed in our submission. I will be supporting A. I will be supporting the recommendations, and that is, as His Worship the Mayor said and others, this allows us to now at least table. I'm glad the word implementation is out. Why? Because the word implementation for me means it's going to happen. We are going to put it in place. Well, we haven't made that decision, and I won't make a decision around any implementation until I get the evidence that I can at least base any decision that I have in any vote. So, Chair, I will be supporting the recommendations. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Filipina. Finally, to close it out, Councillor Henderson.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. And I know we must be pretty hungry now, so I'll try and be as quick as I can. Look, I'm going to vote this through today, but it is with some reluctance. I'm confident that we're going to clear the bar for equity provision. I'm really glad that we've got all that in there under those Roman numerals. I think that's a good thing. But I wanted to just briefly take the opportunity to point out that it's a high bar to actually have an equitable basis that we're talking about there. We need 4 things. We need more routes on existing, more services on existing routes, because that's inadequate all across the city. We need more routes themselves to places like Paremaremo, to Piha, to Manarewa. I'm sure we've all got examples of that. The cost of public transport needs to be stabilised or reduced because it's going up and up and up and people are struggling. The costs of provision need to be looked at in terms of a living wage for our drivers. That needs to be looked at as well. Those are 4 problems that are all going to require money and service, and that's all very tough for us to deal with. But we do need to do all we can to modernise our public transport system, and I hope that this is an opportunity to do that. We've talked about Stockholm as an example around here before, and that's got a similar population to us, but it's actually got 3 times the amount of train stations that we have. You know, that's an example of the provision that we don't have that we need to be looking at. So I'm going to vote for it today, but I just want to point out one more thing, is that going forward, the Northwest is a non-negotiable for me, and I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that. We talk about Massey and we talk about Kumeu, those places are doing it really tough, but even places like Te Aratu, where I live, where frequency is not good enough, where there are thousands more residents going in. Right now they're building townhouses all over the place, and people are not seeing bus as a good option. So I'm going to vote this through, but I'm going to be looking at it very closely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good debate, members. Thank you for all your contributions. Now, I suggest that we break out the A from the B in the vote. So can we take the A first? And I'd like to take the A by division. I've got a call for a division. I'll hand to the governance advisor.
Kia ora. So we're taking the clause A1 through to 3. Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Bartley.
Against.
Councillor Casey.
No.
Deputy Mayor.
Aye.
Councillor Coombe.
Aye.
Councillor Cooper.
For.
Councillor Filipina. Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Mayor Goff.
Yes.
Member Henare.
Yes.
Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Mulholland.
For.
Councillor Newman. Member Namanu.
For.
Councillor Sayers.
For.
Councillor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
No.
Councillor Walker. Councillor Watson. Councillor Young.
Declare that carried 15 votes to 5. Members, can we take the B and the C together on voices? Thank you. So we'll now take the B and the C on voices. All those in favour say aye.
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 And to the contrary, no. Declare that carried, that B and C is carried unanimously. Sorry. And that concludes that item. And just before we do conclude, I do want to thank the officers for the enormous amount of work. And I'd also like to acknowledge Azim Khan, this is his final report. He's one of the authors of this work. Azim, thank you for your massive contributions to the unit and to all of us. You were instrumental in the transport section of the Auckland Plan. Big body of work and a massive accomplishment for you. All our best at the Infrastructure Commission, I think it is. Infrastructure New Zealand. Thank you very much. Okay, members, we will take a half-hour break. Let's say it is back here at...
2:15.
2:15, we'll come back.